John Gatewood with Gatewood Wealth Solutions. Welcome to our weekly market commentary broadcast. And with me today is Aaron Tuttle, our Chief Investment Officer. Welcome, Aaron.
John, glad to be here.
I just wanted to remind our listeners that today is Veterans Day, and Aaron is one of our veterans who has served our country. Thank you for your service.
More importantly, yesterday was the Marine Corps birthday.
I know. So you're a former Marine.
That's
because
right.
There are no ex-Marines, only former ones.
Once a Marine, always a Marine.
But thank you for your service. That's fantastic. And boy, speaking of the Marines, there's been a lot of action out there in the world, especially in the political world. So apparently, there's been somebody who's been pronounced as the president-elect, Vice President Biden, so the media is taking that on. But President Trump and some of the Republicans have announced that that's not been certified as yet, and they're going through some legal action. So we're going to talk about that today. And of course, we also have the coronavirus has been surging, so we'll talk about that. I know that's some of the things that our listeners have been concerned about. But the market hasn't had the big tank that we were thinking might happen at the election, or that people were afraid was going to happen. So it's held pretty well. In fact, it reached a few new highs. So why don't we move into what's first on the agenda, and that is the coronavirus timeline.
And mainly just a quick little review here. We continue to progress on this nicely. So why don't we just move to the next slide?
So we've been talking about what the market would do and where we would position the portfolios depending upon the outcome of the election, and it's still unclear because Biden...
That's exactly what we gave our biggest baseline percentage.
Yes.
Right? We said that this would be a contested election, that it would be an election week, if not longer, and we are right there with that call. That has been the correct call, and it is still kind of not clear on who the next president would be.
Yeah, I mean, what we do is, of course, as always, is that we're looking at the facts, and the facts is that President Trump has legal remedies that he can pursue where he can plead his case because he believes that there's been either voter or election fraud that may change the outcome.
Right.
Now, of course, we're not predicting one way or another. All we're trying to do is to figure out what are the odds of that happening, and how will that impact what we do to the portfolios of our clients.
Well, I think something that everyone's familiar with us saying is we're data dependent.
Yes.
And the reality is there are multiple paths, and the more paths that you have, the higher the probability that one of them is successful.
So let's talk about those paths. I think that'd be interesting. I think that's probably not being reported in the mainstream media as much as what is actually happening.
No, it's not, or at least it's being kind of ignored in the mainstream media as a possibility. So we're going to play devil's advocate here, and we are not taking a partisan side. We're just trying to understand the reality. But playing devil's advocate, and one person is certainly a lower probability to win the presidency. That means that we're going to sound partisan to make the case, to understand what the data is and what that probability is.
Correct.
But we're not partisan.
Right.
We've been saying that we are indifferent. There's just a slight chance of that blue wave that could impact the market, but even then you can make a bullish case because of stimulus spending. So we are indifferent. It's just understanding how best to position the portfolio.
Well, we want to make sure that we have all of our possibilities covered, because these things do make a difference in terms of how we manage the portfolios going forward.
Yes, and we're not in unprecedented times. It may
No,
feel that way because we haven't seen something like this for quite some time, but there is precedent for all of this.
Yes, and we'll address some of that.
So I think everyone's aware that currently the projected winner to be president-elect is Joe Biden, with the Pennsylvania win that put him well over the needed 270 votes. But as you said, there is some question on the legality and the certification, because it's not the media that gets to call the election. Nowhere in the Constitution will you say, hey, what does CNN, Fox News, MSNBC say the president or the presidential winner is?
Well, let's talk about that process, because I think that most people don't really know what that process is.
And we can just simply go to the administration, the GSA, out of the 1963 Presidential Transition Act, has the ability to give the funds to the president-elect so they can begin their transition. And this is Emily Murphy. She's probably the most powerful female in Washington, D.C. right now. And there is a specific criteria that has to be followed before these transition funds are released. And it's a certification that has to go through a constitutional process. That process has not been completed as of yet, so the GSA has not begun the transition. And we saw this back in 2000. If you remember, you do, maybe many of the other workers don't.
I definitely remember.
I remember it as well. It was my second presidential election, and I was in the Marine Corps at that time, watching this play out. But the media did call the race for Al Gore. Now, we all know that Al Gore did not go on to be the president. Now, there are arguments to be made that Al Gore did win the election, and they have been made, especially through 2000 to 2008, they were made continually. So there is historical precedent of the media calling it and calling it incorrectly. Now, whether the outcome of that election was actually processed correctly or not, I think is debatable.
Well, two things I think that was interesting about the Al Gore presidential election was that, number one, the Republicans had a PR campaign that was well funded to point out or pose Al Gore as being a sore loser.
Sure.
So now we're seeing that on the opposite side.
Yes.
Now we have the Democrats saying that about Trump. Secondly, is that he went down the legal path to try to find legal remedies to have the vote recount done in ways that would support his candidacy.
Absolutely.
Right? And so now we're seeing that same thing with Trump.
Absolutely.
So, and that was a real big deal back then, and I don't think that most people remember how significant that was. And really, we're kind of in that same time period.
I think we have a lot more partisanship, and we're a much more divided country. So I do think that it's amplified in 2020 versus 2000. There are some concerns on both sides on the legitimacy of elections that I think need to be addressed. But we can see, based on the predicted, so this is the betting odds. Now, we had said that we didn't think that they were accurate prior to the election, so we're not saying that all of a sudden they are accurate. We're just looking at where people are putting their money, and they're giving it about it bounces from 15 to 20% likeliness on the predicted models that President Trump will get a second term. So there are people that are making bets on these outcomes or these different paths that they can take. So I thought we could go over some of these paths
let's
here.
do that.
And just look at some of the states that are contested. Georgia, there are lawsuits and now a recount. Pennsylvania, there is a lawsuit asking for a recount. Michigan, there is a lawsuit asking for a recount. Wisconsin, I believe, is now recounting, as well as having a lawsuit. Arizona is so close, it'll most likely go to a recount. It's still up in the air about Nevada. There are lawsuits. They continue to get pushed back by the current judge. But let's just run through some of these.
Yeah, well, can I ask you a question?
Sure,
so,
absolutely.
So one of the things we talked about, there's voter fraud and there's election fraud, and you have these different lawsuits. What is the difference between those?
Absolutely. That's why I wanted to start with Georgia, because I think it's the best place to start with. So there is a recount that's going on, and it's about absentee ballots improperly counted. It has been dismissed by a judge, but there's always going to be appeals. The Secretary of State, which many people in that state have called for him to resign, he is not, has came out and publicly said that they are going to do a recount and that they will find illegal voting and double voting, which is basically the same thing. But that is where you get the distinction of voter fraud versus election fraud. There is always voter fraud in every single election. Whether it's intentional or not is another matter. And also there are times where you would never want to proceed in a legal matter on a person. So let's say that there's an elderly woman and her husband dies just a couple of days before she has the absentee ballot. She fills it in, she sends it in because she knows his wishes. That's something you definitely don't want to go into court for. But then there are other things where people are out of state and there's issues. But voter fraud happens in every election.
Yeah,
I don't think anybody's
how
denying
much of voter fraud could actually really truly impact
that's the
an election?
reason.
Because you're talking about individual actors, right?
Right.
I mean,
That's the reason that it's really never pursued. One, it's not worth the time to go in there and dig and find it because it's always so small. It's rarely able to change the election. Now, that's voter fraud. There's election fraud, and that can absolutely change the election. It's typically discovered, but these are in the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of votes. And that is whenever a campaign is using, and you have to have a lot of collaboration, so it's not easy to pull off at all. You have to have many of the checks and balances on your side where they would go through, and then you look at statistical analysis to pull that out. That is election fraud, and that's rare, and oftentimes it is discovered. Now, the problem with Georgia is the margins are so low that voter fraud could amount to a significant enough count to overturn a very razor-thin election. So that's where voter fraud is an issue, and then we start to get in there.
so is that where they're focusing on the voter fraud is in the Georgia election, or are they doing both?
They will do both. There will be some forensics. There are some irregularities coming out of Fulton County where things were stopped and then restarted. And that's the thing is that those things are really difficult to prove. So it's like anything. It doesn't matter what the media. So just as much as they can't call the presidency constitutionally, they don't really have any credibility to move that forward in a legal manner.
Right, they don't have any authority.
All the fact checking and all the statements of the media going in there. Now, they may be right or wrong on whether something is false or not, but it doesn't matter. Where that'll be found out is in the courts.
Right.
So that's what's going to matter. So it doesn't matter if they have fact checks or not. Those things have to go through a process, and that's the way you want it. You don't want to be able to have people to basically say what you're saying is ridiculous, it doesn't have any merit, and you have no legal remedy. The thing is if you're lying, that there's perjury and other things that come out.
But at least that's the great thing about our country is that we do have a legal system,
Yes.
so that we do have a place to hold ourselves in court and plead our case.
Right.
So what about Pennsylvania? Let's move on
So
to
Pennsylvania, this is as we had said, this is all going to come down to Pennsylvania in the election. Now we weren't really forecasting this scenario, but it's still the one with the electoral count. So the Trump administration, through their attorney Rudy Giuliani, is claiming that there was a two-tiered system in the Pennsylvania election where there were ballots that were cured. Now, what does cured mean? That means that you send your ballot in, you forget to put your address in, the election board calls you, gets the address, fills it in, and cures the infraction in the ballot so that it's a legitimate ballot. And that could be okay, but every county needs to do that. And if every county didn't do that, then you're disenfranchising some and giving advantages to another. So that is one of the allegations. There's also that individuals were not able to observe the counting of ballots in specific locations. They were blocked legally. There is video of them, and there's 60 signed affidavits. Now, this is at the risk of perjury. So these individuals are going to be in this lawsuit. In addition, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has decided that they will hear the allegations based on what we had gathered. We usually stop pulling the information around 10 because we don't have time to continue to update the slides. But when we put these slides together, that was the case. And a lot of this is going to really depend on Act 77, where the Pennsylvania legislator determined the time and the place, 8 p.m., on election night, that all ballots needed to be in. The Supreme Court in Pennsylvania changed that ruling to say that they just need to be postmarked by election day. The constitutional issue with that is the U.S. Constitution says only the state legislators can determine the time and manner of elections. So if the Supreme Court is changing that, and within that Act 77, I'm not a lawyer, but from what I've gathered, it says that if anything is changed, the act goes away. So there seems to be a strong case. Supreme Court Justice Alito has also weighed in at the beginning, before the election. They said they refused to expedite the hearing So that's where you'll hear on the fact checks that no, that this was removed, and they're not. The Supreme Court said they would not hear it. No, they said they would not expedite it. They are signaling that they will hear it and they're interested in it, and even more likely that this will get into front of the Supreme Court. Is so far there's been 10 attorney generals from different states that say we want a ruling on the mail-in ballots. Now, I don't think it's a coincidence. They just all happen to be Republican attorney generals, right?
Right.
But that does increase the odds, and then if it goes to the Supreme Court, there is a significant majority, including the recent appointee Amy Barrett, where she said that she will follow what the law says. So that is a statement that rings well on the right, which basically says you cannot legislate from the bench. That needs to be done in the legislature, and that is exactly what Rudy Giuliani is saying happened here. So I think Pennsylvania is up in the air. There's also some things that are going on within the state legislature of Pennsylvania, and what's important to know is the Republicans control both of the houses in the state legislature. So yet to be seen here, but there is a lot of movement, and that's why we are saying that there are paths here for President Trump. In our models, we can't just say it's going to be Biden.
Let's talk about Nevada, because Nevada has a Democratic controlled state.
Okay, so we were going to jump down to Nevada. Maybe.
Oh, did I go the wrong one? Oh,
it's all right. So
actually, I was. We can go to any one you want, but let's talk about Nevada.
Let's talk about Nevada. Yes.
Let's put the Democrat one next,
so
and then we'll go back to a Republican.
This is also close. Whenever I check the numbers this morning, it seems that Biden's lead has expanded. That's not true in every state. Go back to Pennsylvania. Those glitches, they found another glitch, so now the lead for Trump is 45,000 votes. So it continues to narrow in Pennsylvania, continues to widen in Nevada. There are 2 sworn affidavits. 60 and 2, I think, is a big difference. It's really hard to get 60 people to be a part of a conspiracy. I don't think it would be hard to get 2 people to be part of a conspiracy.
Right, that's more like voter fraud versus election fraud.
Right. So, but there are allegations. The Secretary of State is saying that they will look into any credible voter allegations. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that the current allegations are credible, or that they're not credible? Because it all depends on how you emphasize that word, right?
It's all about the interpretation. Right?
It is. As we know when we text our significant others, right?
Right.
How did that text come across?
That's a big one. But even when we talk to our attorneys about interpretation, they always give us different ones.
Well,
it depends on which one's going to favor your way.
Yeah, it's the same thing with the economists. Just cut off one hand, because you'll never get a straight answer. On one hand.
Right.
But so far, the courts have dismissed the cases that have been brought in Nevada. It probably will go to recount because it is small. But once again, there are some whistleblowers. So let's spin the thing. What state are we going to put it in?
How about Michigan?
So I'm looking for the hand. For all those people that are in Michigan, they understand what I just did. So Trump campaign is alleging that there is voter fraud in ballots. It's backdating ballots, where the U.S. Postal Service employees have said that they needed to they were told by their supervisors to backdate ballots, not verifying signatures as they were coming in, that there was fraudulent processing, as well as an audit of the Dominion voting software. Now, whether this is right or not, but I have seen images where all 6 of these states happen to be 6 states that have Dominion software. Maybe that may be factual, but it may be a misinterpretation. I didn't go into it as well, but there are 234 pages. I'm still trying to find out the number of affidavits, because is it one person that wrote 234 pages? But there are 234 pages of sworn affidavits regarding these frauds. A Michigan judge did deny the first filing. An appeal was put in place. And the appeal didn't deny it. They asked for more documentation. So that is kind of a clue that that appeal is interested in hearing it. As well as, here's another state where the state legislature is controlled by the GOP. And they are saying that they had an emergency session and issued subpoenas to election officials. So there are other remedies and other factors. It's not just the federal court system that are trying to deal with this matter.
How about Wisconsin?
So they are in the process of a recount. There are 131 sworn affidavits in that state. There is a statute in Wisconsin on filling out the way that a mail-in vote or an absentee ballot must be completed, and they also cured the thing. So if you look at the statute, just the plain language, once again, we're not attorneys, it says that you cannot complete these ballots. They have to be completed in a certain way, and election officials were told to complete it. Now, what I've seen, once again, we got rumor mills everywhere, is that when they completed it, the election board knew that they were doing something that was questionable, and so not to be deceitful or whatever, they filled them out in red ink so it would be easy to find those later. Once again, these are rumors, but that would indicate that those ballots were incorrectly completed by the straight language of the statute, and whether that's credible or not, each person can make an argument that you disenfranchised somebody because they were legitimate votes.
Right.
I think there's an argument to be made there, but there's also a statute that says, well, this is what needs to be completed. So let the courts decide, but that seems to be a recount, and as well as some challenges to some ballots.
And then we have Arizona still.
Well, we have Nevada here, but Arizona. The Trump campaign has backed some, or has gone alongside the RNC on a couple of lawsuits. One of them is Sharpiegate. I don't know if people have caught that trend, but apparently there are individuals that feel that their vote was not recorded correctly because they were issued Sharpies to fill them out in Maricopa County. Now, if you go into the manufacturer process, like what they recommend, they say do not use Sharpies because they can bleed through and be scanned incorrectly. So there's merit that says, well, Sharpies shouldn't be used, and if they issued them, I think there's a complaint there. And the election board has said, don't worry, they will be counted. To me, that's admitting that there has been some issues, and there are people searching their vote. I'm not sure how that works, but there have been screen images of them being canceled. Once again, it's really hard to get to the truth. As much noise and as much information and signals that are out there, there's a massive amount of misinformation, and I promise you it's on both sides. It's really hard. You got to really do a lot of digging to find out what is actually happening, because there's just so much politics that are involved.
Well, what's interesting too is that the GOP leaders like Mitch McConnell and others are backing Trump.
Right.
So they have not acquiesced to Biden being the president-elect, as the media states.
Right.
So while he's making legitimate plays and claims by pleading his case in court, which is the way to go,
Yes.
how difficult would it be for them to prove election fraud? Because it's, now you're looking at a true coordinated effort, right? And can that really be proved in court? Or could we see that maybe the outcome in one or two states would be the key to actually moving the vote in favor of Trump?
Yes. It's probably very difficult to prove. You can certainly point to irregularities within the election results that cause somebody. So evidence is not proof, right? You can have evidence and follow that evidence, but there's a perfectly good rationale that you may never know. So there are, because it's a secret ballot, it's really hard to detect. But you can certainly point to irregularities, and we're already seeing some glitches within the software, where most of them, the glitches that have been discovered, have been from where ballots or votes that were cast for Trump end up in Biden's column. And we are finding those. It's one of the reasons Pennsylvania is narrowing, is because these glitches are being found. Now, one thing is to say is, well, why do all these glitches go in the direction of Trump to Biden? Fair enough. But do you think Biden's campaign is going out there trying to find the glitches while they're in the lead? There's a motivation and an incentive by one to try to find them. And maybe they're finding others and they're not reporting those glitches. Why would they do that? So it's really hard to take an irregularity and say that this is proof. It is evidence, but it's not proof.
So let's talk. Let's surmise different outcomes here.
Yes.
One is, of course, that Biden is ultimately
Most likely outcome.
the most likely outcome. But the reality is, we still have to be prepared for a flip the other way to Trump.
Yes.
Right? Because if that happens, I mean, we're definitely going to be looking at changes to our portfolios. So walk us through kind of the timeline and where does certification actually happen, and what happens if there's not a decision by each of those dates? What's the
So this is
let's
where
just
we
take it all the way through until we've gone through the last possible procedure.
This is where we get down the rabbit hole, because it's not just in the courts and the recounts where Trump has paths to a second term. He could still lose these recounts and lose these court cases, and there's still another option that can be used. And the reason it's important to talk about the fact that the GOP leadership is getting behind him, specifically Graham, but McConnell as well as Ted Cruz and a lot of other Republicans, and they've called on the Attorney General Bill Barr to start moving the Department of Justice to look into these allegations, which they are doing. So what is that rabbit hole case? And Lindsey Graham has actually talked about needing to do this. So all of these states, if we look here onto the left, if we go to the state legislature of Wisconsin, of Michigan, of Pennsylvania, of Georgia, of Arizona, not Nevada, we can see that they're Republican controlled. And all of these guys are in the AAAs. They want to go up. And they have to report to the 70 million people that pulled the lever for Trump, that are certainly looking at those irregularities as proof of a stolen election. And if this was to flip the other way, the other side's going to see this as a stolen election.
It
just matters what column you're in. Right, absolutely. So if we go to Article 2 of the Constitution, it says that each state shall, in such manner as the legislature therefore may direct, a number of electors. So let's say you lose the popular vote. Now there are laws and other things, but we're going down the rabbit hole, and GOP officials have actually encouraged this as a remedy, where the state legislators could post a different electoral slate of voters. Or they could do none of it and just say, hey, we're not sending any of these electorals because we think that this was voter fraud, and we are not going to post a group in the Electoral College whatsoever. And this is 2020. So if this is going to happen...
Right, I mean, everything else has happened this
year.
I know. Why not this happen, right?
I mean, what a way to end the year, right?
Oh my gosh.
And what a constitutional crisis this would be. But if you don't think that that influence isn't there, just look at this House map. Remember, it was going to be a blue wave. Look at that column of all the toss-up. And look at the next column of the Republicans, where they were leaning Republican. There isn't a blue box in that. So none of the seats that were leaning Republican were lost. None of the seats so far in the toss-up districts went to Democrats. And you see 4 red boxes, and I think there's actually a couple of more since this morning, that have gone the way of the GOP. So this is a better representation of who these state legislators are seeing as their current constituents for election. So I think that risk is there. Also, what's important is if you get to where you don't have 270 electoral votes, and you don't have enough people to have a clear winner, and this happened in the 1976 election. It happened in 1877 because they went like 170-something days to try to figure out who the president would be, and it was Hayes versus Tillman. And there was voter fraud in that one. That one's historians can pretty much say no. If you're sending telegrams to Florida and Texas to the GOP, the carpetbaggers that say, hey, these states have to hold, and they get to a tie. So then what happens? Well, you don't have enough electoral votes to win. It goes to the House. And a lot of people that want a President-elect Biden will say, yeah, great comfort, because they now have 218 votes. The Democrats have the majority. They'll get their way. Not exactly. because it's not based on your representation in the state for votes. Each state gets one vote. Look at this map. Those states are going to be, if you start to break them up to delegates, there are 4 ties. There are 26 to 27 Republicans. So not only would it not be 26 to 4 or to 24, it's likely to be 26 or 27 to 20 in that race. And who do you think that these they're going to elect? Now the Senate, it will. I think, from my understanding, the Senate would then elect the vice president. So, man, what a ticket that could be.
That'd be pretty interesting. Well, let's talk about the timeline. So, well, this is an outcome that is possible.
Possible.
Not impossible.
Not impossible, because there are GOP leaders that are actually saying this is the direction we should go.
So let's talk about the timeline of what decisions are made when.
Right.
Because this is the final recourse.
Right.
Okay. So what would happen in the interim?
So they have till December 8th to post that Electoral College slate. And then on December 14th, the Electoral College votes in the Senate. And this is whenever there's really an actual president-elect, constitutionally. The media, it's been our tradition that they usually call it, because you can see the writing on the wall on which direction it was going to go. And historically, state legislators have always put the Electoral College slate up that was won by the popular vote. Now, this is a republic, not a democracy, so they could go against that way. Now, if they do that, I mean, it's a constitutional crisis, for sure. So we are not saying that they should do that, but we're already in a bad situation. I think that makes us into an even worse.
Now, it seems like we've had in the past occasions in which the electors do actually cast their ballot
Yes.
for somebody other than what the candidate was that was elected in that state. So talk to us about that.
Constitutionally, an Electoral College member can vote any way that they want. They can.
I mean, this is as recent as our last election, because we had some of the electorates voted for Secretary Clinton.
Yes.
And while the state actually had gone for Trump.
Correct. So it can happen. It depends on the state. There are laws in some of the states that say that it's mandatory that they go with the popular vote. But at that point, it's really all about who has the most political power at that point. So it's yet to be seen. But it is important that by December 14th that there is Electoral College and they do vote. Otherwise, we're going to continue on. And if we don't have anything by January 20th, my understanding is whoever is the Speaker of the House, and rumor is Nancy Pelosi does not have the votes because they did so abysmal in the House. They lost a lot of seats, and this was supposed to be a blue wave. Now, at 538, Nate Silver, they're all saying how great they were. They got the states right. We talked about how they could get the conclusion correctly, but for all the wrong reasons. No one predicted that it would be Detroit, Milwaukee, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Atlanta, and the turnout in these urban areas that would cause the election to go the other way. So they were right for all the wrong reasons at the moment. So the polls were completely off. But the point is that whoever the House Speaker is, if we don't have it, that will be the new president while the House and the Senate figure out who the next president would be.
So this could be an interesting Christmas holiday season, huh?
It's 2020.
What a way to end the year, with more uncertainty.
I don't know. I feel like this year somehow it'll be January 3rd and we'll still be in 2020.
It could be. Let's hope not. But so, what is the market priced in right now?
Sure, but I think the thing here that we want to emphasize is there's a myth that holds the country together. The notion of this representative government, and if our elections are not, if a large percentage of the people in our country do not have faith in the election, and currently we're there, and if it goes the other way, we're still there. It's just a different group of people. You can't govern the country. So, if there is this belief that election fraud is non-existent and unlikely, and when they did the recounts in Florida, it was only just a few hundred different. And recounting the vote doesn't seem to really change things. Then we should just recount. and bring some faith back into this. Otherwise, this could get out of control. And the other thing is the media, whenever they are trying to say this is illegitimate information, this has been discredited, they're only fueling that animosity. So we got to quit doing the stuff that we're doing and quit playing politics and just say, let's be very transparent here. Let's be very open. Otherwise, this country just is not governable for the next 4 years. You think the last 4 years were rough, and the president, what's likely to be President Biden, will really struggle because there's likely going to be an even stronger red wave in 2022, and they're going to the Republican-controlled Senate and possibly a Republican-controlled House is going to do everything they can to make the presidency of Biden look horrible, and they're going to say, hey, it was great under Trump, the economy was moving, and these guys have messed it all up. So I think a recount is our best move forward to bring some transparency and bring some faith back into the system.
I think the other thing is going to be, how do we handle mail-in votes going forward? Because now that cat's been let out of the bag, don't you imagine that'll be part of the way voting will be done in the future? But how do you then, so the challenge would be, how do you assure that you're getting true voters and not having voter fraud?
I think you go to the state of Florida. Florida is the third most populous state in the nation. Within hours, you know the result. They require you to post how many absentee ballots you have prior to the election night, so that you know. They can't say, oh, we found another 20,000 or another 30,000 votes. We need to get these processed. So I think Florida is the model. Why is it the model? Because of 2000.
Well, I think that the whole thing about the idea of the model is that, it's having a consistent process. I mean, right now, if every state has its own process for how they validate whether or not a voter actually signed or posted a mail-in ballot, then you're always going to have
I think
confusion.
Constitutionally, you could probably set security standards, but the Constitution does leave the manner up to the state legislators.
Because we certainly need to have faith in the process.
Yeah, if we don't have faith in the process, we have a much bigger problem.
Absolutely. So maybe we should go and move on to the coronavirus.
Yes.
Because we now are coming off the highest number of cases in a single day as of yesterday. And we've seen spikes in Europe, even Sweden's been going up. The good news for us here in the United States is that the death count is still pretty flat, and that's a pretty remarkable thing.
That's a litmus test.
But it's the case count that's now starting to create rumblings among governors and local officials that they want to go and start lockdowns once again.
Yes.
What are our thoughts on that? Because that's one of the things that we said, that while the economy is recovering, reverting back to lockdowns is the one thing that could definitely derail our recovery.
Yes. So one thing is that the threshold for a positive is pretty low, and Dr. Fauci has said this. I don't understand it, but it's like at a 30 to 35. That's the threshold is too low according to him. So that's one of the reasons we may be seeing a lot of cases. There are probably many explanations why we see so many cases. Ultimately, like you said, the litmus test is the amount of daily deaths, and that has not grown to near the height that the daily case counts have grown. It is trending up. That means that there is something happening.
But the trend is so low relative to the trend of the growth of the cases.
But we can know that there is an expansion of coronavirus cases in reality because we are seeing additional deaths trend up. So we may not have a good picture of what's really happening relative to April or May, whenever we didn't do as many tests, when we may have had different thresholds, we may have had different tests. We're using a lot of rapid tests. I've seen that there's 30 to 40%, whether these are true or not, but of false positives from those. And then you also have people that may be having multiple tests, some of which are getting into case counts. All of these things are argued all day. So just ignore that and pay attention to the daily deaths. And we see that there is a trend. It's going up, but it's not going up near as much as the cases. There's all kinds of explanations. Also, if we go to where are these cases being reported, they're not on the coast, they're not in the Sun Belt. Why is that important? Because there isn't a second wave yet. they're all in areas that there hasn't been a lot of case counts, and it's very red in the Midwest, especially in the North. And this is back to the seasonality. It's cool. It's not as humid. And it's an environment that the coronavirus seems to do well at. So a lot of explanations here. Thankfully, so far, we have not seen the rise in cases. We have seen the increase in the daily case count here, as in elsewhere. But just, I think it's 4 weeks ago, the FDA director had said that we're about ready to hit, we're in the 7th inning, but we're about ready to hit a big epidemic that is bigger than the one before. Well, so far, thankfully, the death count hasn't shown up in the way that he was concerned about.
Well, I think that this point that you're talking about where the virus is regionally is what we predicted earlier, that really that our thought was that the virus would move around, and you develop hot spots, and so those would just simply be controlled regionally, so you wouldn't have to have some type of national policy because every area was going to be affected differently.
I think one of our calls, though, is it would show up sometime in January, February. It is showing up a little bit early, and well, we're not epidemiologists, so
What the heck, you know, they
can't be right on all.
They didn't give us a break, that little bugger.
But it's not giving anyone a break, I tell you.
Well, let's talk about the herd immunity concept.
Yeah,
too,
so the herd
because
immunity, which it's been politicized.
it's one of the things that we'd actually like to have.
Right, and you get it two different ways. There's a natural occurrence and there's vaccines. And if we look at Sweden, yes, you see the case counts. Now, know that we had to put this in log form. Well, what does that mean? That means it's scaled. So if we left it in linear form, Sweden would basically be on the y-axis. It would be, you wouldn't see it. So Sweden is at about 500 cases a day, while the European Union is at 200,000 cases a day. So if you were to show that on a relative basis, you wouldn't even see Sweden.
Might it just be tiny?
You have to do the logarithmic to see that there is an upturn. And then the daily death count, which once again is the litmus test, we do see a rise, and they are at about 5 on average. Whenever we took the snapshot of this, it was decreasing. But the European Union is well over 2,000 daily deaths. So once again, you have to use a log format to even see this. Now,
Well, it's interesting. So if you take both of those scenarios, that's 1%.
yeah,
Death to cases.
Yes, that's right. I didn't make that connection, but yes. So then, what about this herd immunity? Are those 5 cases disproving herd immunity? We don't think so, and there is a YouTube video called Herd Immunity Facts and Numbers. It's from Sebastian Hasenfelter. She's a German physicist. So she is a scientist. Her specialty isn't viruses, but that actually is what makes this video so easy to understand, is she's approaching it, and it's about a 15-minute video. Highly recommended. It talks about the different herd immunities, vaccination versus natural occurrence, and says that herd immunity doesn't mean that the virus goes away. It means that it's not able to hit that epidemic portion. It just will run through. So it'll be something like the way that the measles were experienced, which is, she'll get into the R ratio, where you'll just have the measles is hot this season, and then it dies off. Then it's hot again. So it's this reverberation as we have more people vaccinated. She also talks about the thresholds needed for herd immunity. All depends on how much the transmission rate is moving. So measles, which is probably the most, it's the fastest spreading disease that we're aware of, has an RO of 12, which means that you need an immunity in the general population of up above 90% before you can slow the spread. This has an RO.
Wow, that's a big number.
Right. This has an RO.
Thank goodness for the measles vaccination.
Yes. This has an RO of 2.4. So the threshold is around that 20 to 40% of people that are immune. So that actually reflects what we are seeing in some of these areas and why we haven't seen that. So we think this is a good explanation. Once again, it's not us saying it. It's not an expert, and I think this video was actually done before all of the politicalization, but maybe not. Maybe she saw the trend and did it early. Yeah. But it's a really good video.
So let's talk about the vaccination.
Yes.
Is on the horizon, and what that might mean to the market, assuming that this is actually effective
So you'd mentioned lockdowns, and Europe is using lockdowns despite the World Health Organization asking countries not to do it unless their healthcare system is being overwhelmed. But they have been using them. But then we had this nice, huge rally on Monday where there was good news that the vaccine that Pfizer has put together has a 90% effectiveness. There's been some questioning since that news, and we even saw some insider trading where the CEO sold 60% of their stock on that day. So yet to be determined, but I think this vaccine, from what we can tell, is effective, and the market is signaling. So thankfully we have that. Now the question is how do you distribute it? That's the next thing. But I personally would much rather have the problem of trying to figure out how do you distribute the vaccine versus how do you get a vaccine.
Exactly.
So
we're
here.
We're definitely at a much better phase right now.
But one of the things that we noticed through this on Monday is there is a new theme that is developing in the U.S., which is a reopening theme. So the banks, the airlines, the hotel industry, all of them rally. And we can see here the stay-at-home theme, so Zoom, Wayfair, Shopify, Netflix, all got hit hard on that day. And we've seen this go. Today is the first day that we've seen the NASDAQ actually rebound, and our listeners probably are aware that we've been heavy tech. Now, even though this is a headwind, and it's what a lot of traders call the Tina trade, there is no alternative. So you had to be in these tech stocks. We think that this is some temporary headwind to the stay-at-home play, but we think the work from anywhere and a lot of the habits that have happened in 2020 are here to stay. And as they bottom, these probably are stocks that you still want to own long term. We're just going through a rough patch as some of the rest of the economy that has really been hit hard is looking attractive with the reopening thing coming back.
Well, in addition to the vaccine, we've also had some good news about employment.
Yes. Well, what is being interpreted as good news? I guess we're pessimists here. Because when we look at the numbers, we think this is probably the last time we see a really big print. All the easy jobs that have returned, and we hope we're wrong on this, have been realized, and now we'll see a slow trend down in unemployment because many of the companies that have let people go are no longer in existence.
Yeah, I think that most of the economists that we listen to and subscribe to feel that it's going to take a number of years before we get back to that low unemployment that we achieved under the Trump administration.
Right.
So we hit new market highs on some of the indices.
On some of the indices, yes, not yet on the S&P unless it's rallying.
It's always moving even while we're talking.
Yes.
So it could happen. It could have come back down.
Well, we're closed now, but we weren't paying attention as we came in.
So are we moving into a bull market?
No, we think we're in a trading range at the moment. Some of the uncertainty. So there was two things. It's not just the vaccine, but there was another thing that happened, and that was the blue wave didn't happen. And what ultimately that means is the tax cuts by President Trump and the Republican Congress is likely to stay in place. Because the Republicans are likely to keep the majority. Now there's issues in Georgia on a runoff on January 5th. And the Republicans also made a lot of headway into the House seats. So we think that is one component, is a log-jammed government where the tax cuts remain in play, as well as some good news on the vaccine front. However, we don't think it's all good news. One, we've been watching the money supply. We've talked about that. We can move on to that. We've seen from upward over 60% growth down to 10% growth. Now 10% is still a significant number, but it's the rate of change. So we are starting to see some choppiness and have been seeing some choppiness. And what could push this through is a stimulus package. And if anyone's paying attention, the Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is talking about a limited stimulus bill, very targeted, and whether that goes through or not, I don't think the Republicans are going to cooperate well with a President Biden, and certainly not with the House. So it may be good that we have a logjam government, that we're not going to have new taxes, but if we do need additional stimulus, or we do need spending, or we have any of these other things that were being priced in for that blue wave, that's probably not going to happen.
So let's say that we reach January now, and finally we have a new president and they're beginning to look towards passing a stimulus bill, because there's been talks of not doing anything until that time. The market's gone up, unemployment's going down, people are feeling better. What's the chance of no stimulus bill being passed?
I think that's a real, not no stimulus package, because the thing with Mitch McConnell, and the reason that he's always the majority leader, is because his sweet spot is getting deals through and figuring out a way how to flip votes. He wants to get things through because he's a politician, and you're a politician for a reason, right? You want to get things to help your constituents and others. So I think that there is still something that will be passed, but it's not going to be passed in a way that you have this roaring economy from government stimulus or government spending or government programs. That's not coming because they don't want to have President Biden. This is me looking at the crystal ball. So I think there's going to be a lot of contention in there, and it's going to have to be the economy driving a strong economy, not fiscal policy driving the economy.
So the money supply, as you've been talking about, is a key indicator that we watch, because there is a correlation between the money supply and whether we should take risk on, put risk on, or take risk off the table. Even though we're still at an historical high and we're now starting to trend but very low, how do we view that in today's scenario economically, since we're coming off this massive market decline and we're in a recovery period?
So we're still holding our 36 months of cash for people that are at or near retirement. So we want to continue to hold that cash buffer. Any excess money, we think you need to put it in the market because you're just not going to make enough to offset inflation. But within the investment portfolio, we are making trades to take some of the leverage or some of the beta, what makes something go up more than the market or down more than the market, out of the portfolio. Just this week we have reduced our gold exposure, gold miners, because there are chances that that one of these Green New Deals come through and it'll be more difficult for mining companies to mine gold in that, so have the physical. So we have made changes there. Our home builders, which has been a fantastic trade for us in our qualified accounts, we've switched them out, and basically we're sitting in the mid-cap 400 core fund, or actually the broad index, because we're just wanting to sit right in the middle of the 9 square from Morningstar, and that's the area that is working.
So has this changed any of our themes?
No, it hasn't changed any of our themes. Not as of yet. So we still think inflation risk is high and there and real. Actually, if we continue with this money supply, and we've seen it last week on the PCE, inflation is above target at the moment. And if things are bottoming, you'll see that number pick up on the index. We still favor equities over fixed income. We still think the U.S. market is the place to be, despite our contended elections saying you want to be out of the U.S. because they're going to have so many problems. If you go to Europe, you're in a lockdown, they have problems as well. So it's one of those things where we've had to adjust what we think would happen in a normal market environment to the current situation. So we still favor U.S. equities, more that mid-small cap. We continue to lower our exposure to technology in the interim, but we still think long-term that's going to be automation. Eventually, once we get the election out of the power plant, I want to spend some time on the move from residential or urban to suburban to rural, with the work from anywhere play, what this means for these cities. But I also want to do one on automation. We're starting to see automation. We are bearish on real estate, at least the corporate real estate and international. The U.S. continues to be the cleanest shirt in a closet full of dirty shirts. It's getting dirtier, but it still is the cleanest. So no change on our current themes.
So with the big uptick in the market earlier this week, how did the asset classes do relative to each other?
So technology has continued to move down. It's getting very close to where the S&P 500 is, so we may get a sell signal on that. And once again, we have been moving some of that, and either to the long short to have some portfolio insurance, or trying to take some of the beta out of the portfolio and sit kind of in that mid-cap area as we see that rotation. We'd like to be in emerging markets, and we'll probably be in emerging markets most likely once we have some certification that it is President Biden, but there's still risk if we do have a President Trump for a second term, and they'll probably double down on tariffs and other things. So we've just found that risk too much to go above our benchmark allocation in emerging markets at the moment.
So let's talk about what would happen to the market under the two different scenarios that we're looking at. One is Vice President Biden becoming president.
Yes.
Second one would be President Trump still being President Trump. How would the market react, and what would we do in those two cases?
So with President Biden, if it's just President Biden, I think the market is okay depending on whether the economy is open or not. Because there's a lot of money that's been created, there will be some traction, we're going to have some turbulence. So that's one scenario. Not much different. If we have those two races in Georgia, actually I think it's just one of the races in Georgia go the other way, then Vice President Kamala Harris would be the tiebreaker in Senate. So that will cause some issues and some uncertainty about tax codes, tax changes. That will get priced out, but it also means that there's probably a lot of stimulus coming because they can push things through. So there's two different scenarios: President Biden with a Republican Senate, President Biden with the tie being the vice president.
So one of the things that
that's January 5th. We'll know on that.
January 5th, okay, because that was one of the things I know that some people have been concerned about, is that if all of a sudden we have the two senators in Georgia turn Democrat,
yes.
and now we have the tiebreak with Kamala Harris, would the market all of a sudden correct at that time?
It would correct, but it's probably going to be a rotation. So in that situation, you want to be in Tesla, you want to be in clean energy, you want to be in things that there's going to be favored through policy, and there's going to be a lot of spending. So you basically, the correction is a rotation to different sectors of the market that the market thinks, well, this is the way capital is going to flow, let me flow my capital that way. So those are the two different scenarios. If it's a President Trump, I think the market would rally significantly, not because anyone is better. If you go back and look at averages on Republican or Democrat presidency, they all average about 10%. So there's just not statistically a big difference between the two, especially whenever you control for who controls what in the legislature. So if it's a divided government, at first it's pretty slow because it's not a stimulus package, but eventually free market capitalism kind of becomes more dominant, and the rules stay the same, and eventually you get a strong economy through that. There's always that hiccup though.
So you talk about a free market economy. So this past week I listened to the chief investment officer of PIMCO talk, and he's one of the first people that's in a large organization at that level that actually hinted that the market may not be truly free market any longer. No. Because of the amount of governmental intervention through monetary and fiscal policy and regulation. And that is why we have to look at politics and policies in terms of helping us to evaluate future market movements. Can you comment on that?
Well, that's one of the reasons we pay attention to money supply. If we didn't have a central bank that moved the money supply and favored others over some groups over other groups, then the efficient market hypothesis would probably be spot on. So no, I completely agree with that statement. The idea of free market capitalism is the idea that people should be able to contract freely, and that the only role the government has is to enforce the contract when somebody has breached it and determine if there has been a breach. It's very cooperative, and capital will flow to whatever is working based on everyone's adherence to cooperation. It's not a perfect system. People always violate things. That's why you do have a government, right? But when the government starts to use its policy, whether that's fiscal or monetary policy, to favor specific areas, you get distortions in the market. And you also have some people that favor this will get upset that there's a lot of lobbyists in the government. And the problem is there's so much corporate money into government. Fair enough, but why is it there? It's there because that's how you do well in a company, right? You get the political favors. So if you have the government favoring some different companies, it's not a surprise that you have a lot of money in government by corporations to be favored.
Well, let's talk about the example of Amazon, for example.
Yeah, so another example of how once there's an advantage that these large corporations will use government to help them along. Amazon got their start and had a competitive edge over brick and mortar. One, because they didn't have the expensive retail space, but that wasn't enough. There was the sales tax that you could avoid, because if you were making a purchase from Missouri and it was in Washington, there isn't a jurisdiction that was supposed to be able, because you say, well, I'm a Missouri person and I'm buying this in Washington. You don't get tax here. And then Washington would be like, no, what are you talking about? The purchase was made in Missouri. So Amazon was really big about being able to avoid state tax purchases. But as they got bigger and bigger and bigger, and other people started to look at this model as viable, and they were concerned that people would enter in, just so happens that they start to support the need to collect sales tax on purchases, and one of the reasons is because they had enough scale that they could build the programs embedded in their software that would be very costly, and it makes it really difficult for an upstart to be able to do similar things.
So they created a nice barrier to entry for others.
And you go back to Upton Sinclair, read The Jungle, where you have this narrative of people, of the meatpacking industries doing horrible. Well, it just so happens that Tyson can offset $1 million machine on processing to meet government regulations, which is probably all about trying to ship food to Europe at the time, but mom and pop can't, because they're only doing 100 chickens a week, where Tyson is doing thousands upon hundreds of thousands a week. Well, the marginal cost of that machine for that chicken is nothing for Tyson, so it would favor the larger corporations over the mom and pops, and one of the reasons that we see large corporations do well when we get into government policy and fiscal monetary favoring large corporations, and all of a sudden you see a drop in the amount of new startups and a lot of small businesses, which has been the trend for quite some time.
Well, we'll explore more of that as we go along with our weekly broadcast, but we're out of time today. And I can't wait to see what happens over the next few weeks, because there's a lot of moving parts still, and there's still time left in 2020, which means that surprises are still going to happen. We can't end this year on a dud note, right?
No, we got to go out with a bang for sure.
Well, I want to thank our listeners today for listening in. But Aaron, if they want to subscribe because they want to have more opportunity to hear our voice about what's going on in the market, what should they do? Can you point down?
Right underneath John. Click that button that says subscribe, please, and that will help us. The more subscriptions that we have, actually, the better the technology that YouTube offers us. So it allows us to be more timely and allows us to have higher quality videos. So please, please, please hit that button down below to subscribe. And John, if they have questions about their portfolio, or they are a person that is interested in how we can help them protect their portfolio, what should they do?
Well, they should call our direct line here, which is on the screen, which is 314-924-5100. And any of our lead advisors would be more than happy to speak with you to talk about your portfolios, questions, or anything that we can help you with. But in the meantime, our goal here is to give our listeners a data-driven, expert view of the economy and the market, so that we can sift through the noise of the mainstream media and find the facts to help them to be better informed.
Yes.
So thank you and your team. You're doing a phenomenal job, and we look forward to having you back next week.
Please like this video, and as well as make any comments, and also on the daily 3x3, please leave comments or likes there as well. It gives us information so that we can better serve you in the content that we're producing, because we are absolutely committed to give good, relevant information in a timely manner.
Thanks again, everyone. We look forward to seeing you next week.